Hi everybody, Dr. Laurie Perrin here from Slow and Steady 360, and I'm here to talk to you, as promised, about intermittent fasting. I'd like to go through the health benefits, the anti-aging benefits, and really the science behind why all of this is the case, and see if in the end you would be interested in trying it. I just thought that I would start off by discussing what kind of piqued my interest in intermittent fasting, and it's definitely sort of a roundabout way that I got here. The long and short of it, to be honest, is a few years ago, insurance companies started stating that they wanted us to start counseling patients who were overweight or obese, essentially an elevated BMI, body mass index, on how to lose weight. You know, this is obviously a national epidemic in our country as well as elsewhere, and hence insurance companies are trying to get to physicians to counsel patients on weight loss. And to be honest, they pay us more if we document that we have counseled patients not only on the fact that their BMI is elevated, but that we have discussed a plan with them. And so for me at that point, really the search was on to find what I was going to talk with patients about and how was I going to go about that. Honestly, it's not been something that I've ever been all that comfortable with talking about. I feel like that's always been something that's been a little bit of a put down or somewhat paternalistic, and it really hasn't been my forte in talking with patients. But I really wanted to find a way not only to get the insurance reimbursement, but really noticing that over half my patients are in that range, and if I could find something that would be helpful to them, that would just be amazing. So in my search, I sort of came across a physician. His name is Jason Fung, F-U-N-G, and he wrote a book, many books, but the one I found was called The Obesity Code. It's $11 on Amazon, and I bought the book, and I'll tell you, it is not a pleasurable read. If I were you, if you decided to get it, I would be reading some sort of Harlequin romance at the same time, because you're gonna need something to balance out the obesity code. But what's in there is fascinating. It really goes through why, especially our country, has such a problem with obesity. And it talks about it from a hormonal level, and not the estrogen, progesterone hormones that I talk about a lot in obstetrics and gynecology, but really insulin and cortisol levels, and mostly insulin resistance. And after reading this, the science made so much sense to me. I was totally hooked. So I read about it and I've researched it, and I said to Jason one night, I don't really think I can talk to patients about this without really trying it and seeing for myself, A, how difficult it is, if it's even really sustainable, and if it makes a difference. So I started doing intermittent fasting myself, and guys, it's been a total game changer in my life, 100%. I cannot express to you enough. So let me start just by going through what happens in our bodies when we eat, what happens in our bodies when we fast, and then some of the science behind why fasting for periods of time is so unbelievably healthy for us. First of all, what happens when we eat? So when we eat, our bodies break down our foods essentially into glucose and fatty acids. The glucose is gotten into the cell and it's converted to ATP, which is what our body uses for energy. So we eat a meal, we get that glucose into our bloodstream and it gets into our cells, and we utilize that for energy. But what happens to the excess glucose that we don't utilize? Well, that gets stored in our liver as glycogen. And from there, once our glycogen stores are filled, the rest is really converted into fat, as well as the fatty acids that we ingest. Those also are stored in our bodies in the form of triglycerides. So what happens in our bodies is that we use insulin to get the glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. Now, if you're like me, to some extent, whenever I heard the word insulin, I just sort of thought of diabetes. And I always coupled the two, and I didn't really realize how important insulin is to people who even aren't diabetic, and really how important it is to people who aren't diabetic so that they don't become diabetic. What happens over time is if our bodies continue to see elevated amounts of glucose, and especially forms of glucose that are simple, like just table sugar and white flour and processed foods, our insulin levels go up and we start to develop what's called insulin resistance. And as our insulin resistance occurs, meaning that the cells are no longer so great at taking the blood glucose into our cells and utilizing it, and therefore it stays in our bloodstream, and eventually that's how we develop diabetes. Switching gears, what happens when we fast? In general terms, when we fast, our bodies start to utilize that immediate glucose that is in our bloodstream, probably within the first 1 to 3 hours of a fast. That's what we tap into, that's what we use. Then we start to move into pulling glucose from our liver stores. Probably in that 8 to 12 hour mark especially, we are really pulling that glucose from our liver from the form of glycogen. And after 8 to 12 hours, essentially there's a bit of a metabolic switch, it's called, where we start to deplete the glucose that's readily available for us and the stuff in our liver, and we start to utilize the adipose tissue, our fat stores, for deriving energy. And that energy is often in the form of ketone bodies. I also am really fascinated at what's happening in the cellular level when we fast. Our cells respond to fasting in a number of ways and in a number of adaptive responses. Fasting helps with DNA repair. It creates mitochondrial biogenesis. And if you remember from the HIIT workout video, mitochondria are the powerhouse of our cell and where that ATP comes from, as well as promoting autophagy. And autophagy is a process that happens that when our bodies recognize that a cell is damaged or old, it self-regulates it and it gets rid of it. And lastly, we significantly downregulates inflammation in the cell. And there's so much out there right now about inflammation, and especially at the cellular level, and how it creates so much hardship for us and so much pain in our bodies and just much poorer health overall. So what does all this mean? What it really means is that on a scientific level, both in animal and in human models, that regular fasting, especially over 12 hours, has been proven to be hugely beneficial to our bodies from a metabolic standpoint, a cellular standpoint, and an anti-aging standpoint. And the research that I have found has been in the New England Journal of Medicine, in cellular metabolism, in cardiology journals, and in nutrition journals. It is literally everywhere. If you're gonna do intermittent fasting, what does it look like? I know as soon as you hear the word fasting, most of us have a guttural response of like, oh my gosh, I can't fast. There's no way. I'm gonna get lightheaded. There's no way I can do it. It's not good for your body. There's all these negative connotations that are associated with fasting. And as my friend Kim would say, you almost wish they came up with a better name, because intermittent fasting so quickly potentially creates that negative connotation. I try to reframe it a little bit. You can call it intermittent eating, but I feel like for myself, just knowing the benefits of fasting, for me, fasting, that word no longer really has a negative connotation. So actually, there's a couple of options of how you can approach this. And really the science talks about both of these methods that I have listed. And really they seem to find very similar outcomes regardless of how you do it. I think the point is that your body is fasting for some significant period of time. So the couple options we have here, one is the 16-8 split. And this is where you choose like an 8 hour of an eating window. And so maybe that's 9 to 5 for you. Maybe it's 11 to 7 or 2 to 10. Kind of depends on your lifestyle, depends on your busy time, when you go to sleep, how early you wake up. All those factors really come into play. So you essentially eat during those 8 hours and you fast for the remaining 16. During the 5-2 split, you eat normally for 5 days, and then for 2 days during the week, you significantly restrict your calories to about 700 to 900 calories a day. Hence, essentially, you're fasting. So what's worked best for us? We like the 16-8 split. That seems to work best for our lifestyle. And we tend to eat between the hours of 11 and 7. We started just by fasting during the week, and just to sort of see how that felt. And we're pretty flexible on some level about when we do intermittent fasting, because if we're traveling, or I've been up all night at work, or social plans, there sometimes might be times where the intermittent fasting doesn't really work for us, and we are absolutely okay with that. We just really try to do it as consistently as we can for the majority of the week. So in the back of my mind, I think if I can do intermittent fasting for 5 to 6 days during the week, I feel like I'm in a good place. What have we found over time with the intermittent fasting? How has it affected our lives? What's interesting is that we found that we're really not hungry all that often anymore over time. It was pretty easy over a few months to start incorporating the weekends because we would just wake up on a Saturday or Sunday and, to be honest, just not really feel all that hungry. We had a ton more energy, especially in the mornings, and our minds were so much clearer. I think utilizing those ketone bodies for that brain fuel, it's such a cleaner fuel. Without a lot of that brain fog, and you don't really experience that during intermittent fasting. And the other thing that we really noticed was that our moods were much more stable. And I feel like this is mostly because our insulin and our cortisol levels were so much more stable with the intermittent fasting. We weren't having these huge spikes of insulin and huge spikes of cortisol, that sort of fight or flight hormone, which kind of keeps you on edge all the time. And that we were much calmer and much just in a better mood. I'd like to share with you a little bit about Jason's experience. And so I have a clip of him talking about his experience with intermittent fasting. So here's Jason.
So I started intermittent fasting about 8 months ago. If I had ever previously thought about restricting the time frames when I could eat, it was likely to incite an emotional insurrection with panic and anger being the band leaders. Can I say insurrection yet? Yeah, insurrection it is. And for the first 10 to 15 days probably of intermittent fasting, that's the way it went. It was really uncomfortable. I couldn't wait for 11 a.m. to show up. But after a couple of weeks, I noticed those feelings started dissipating. And the interesting thing is that's the first time that I recognized that I had an emotional relationship with food. And now with the emotions out of the way, I see food more as fuel, as medicine. And I literally have conversations before I eat something about the nutritional value, about the health of what I'm putting into my body. And so if you see me wandering around town talking to myself, I'm just talking about food. Anyway, since I started, I have lost weight. My weight has stabilized. I feel less anxious. I sleep better. My head is clear most of the time, and I generally feel better. And so it's been a game changer for me.
So I've talked a lot about the science behind intermittent fasting and how on a cellular level it's so good for us and how the cells adapt. But what really does intermittent fasting do for us, and why am I pushing it and wanting you to know how important it is and how I feel like it's one of the vital limbs of a healthy lifestyle? What the studies have shown is in humans, especially, intermittent fasting is shown to ameliorate obesity, period. It improves our insulin resistance, it improves dyslipidemia, hypertension, and inflammation. And the effects are seen at the cellular level and with regard to weight loss in a matter of 2 to 4 weeks. In animals and in humans, intermittent fasting is found to improve physical coordination, including balance. In animal studies alone, they find that spatial, associative, and working memory are all improved. And clinical studies with humans are also underway now at the NIH to look exactly at these same findings to see if they also are concurrent in humans as well. One of the things I think is really important also for us to discuss here is that intermittent fasting is only part of the food foundation, not just in Slow and Steady 360, but in general overall. Once you've gotten comfortable with when you're eating and you feel like you kind of have the intermittent fasting piece down, it's really important to then focus on what you're eating as well. We will move into the clean eating portion next. And again, it's sort of in that same vein of if I want you to sort of get the when you're eating and feel comfortable with that. And then we're going to start to work on what you're eating. The truth is, all the science supports this 100%, that you cannot expect to have the overwhelming health benefits of intermittent fasting by itself unless at some point you really clean up your diet and get rid of the processed foods, the sugars, and the unhealthy fats. What are some of the practicalities that come with intermittent fasting? Well, despite the evidence that there's a multitude of health benefits, there's still some resistance to adapting this. Again, I think because of that negative connotation of fasting, and just hearing that word sort of makes people almost quickly move back and say, I don't want to do that. Some of the reasons behind that is that this idea of 3 meals a day with snacks in between is completely ingrained into our culture. And secondly, when switching to intermittent fasting, many people experience hunger, and that's a little bit scary, or you feel like you're going to be lightheaded, or your stomach hurts or is growling, and you feel that there's even a reduced ability to concentrate when you're fasting. And I would say at first, I would believe this to be true, but really what they find is if you can stick with it, even for 1 to 2 weeks, that all goes away, and you will start to see the benefits in the clearer mind and the calmer mood and the weight loss and the general health benefits, as opposed to those symptoms that you were feeling at the very beginning. So it really is something that if you're going to try it, you want to sort of say, I'm going to try this for at least 2 to 4 weeks, and I would really prefer 4 to 6. If your interest is piqued on intermittent fasting and you'd like to start it, I would welcome that with open arms. If you want to do your own research and maybe check out the obesity code, remember, please read it with something that's pleasurable. Please give it a try. If you'd like some guidance or help along the way, feel free to reach out to me at slowsteady360@gmail.com. I am happy to help get you started with intermittent fasting. Most importantly, please be good to yourself, and remember that this is a process that takes time, probably at least 4 to 6 weeks, to really feel like you kind of got the intermittent fasting down. And then you're going to be amazed. It's just going to feel like the way you need to be. It's just going to feel like part of your lifestyle, and kind of, almost to be honest, a no-brainer. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my talk on intermittent fasting, and I hope that it has been stimulating for some of you and inspiring, and that you at least take some time to look into it and see if this is something that would work for you. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.